Have you ever like walked into a room and just instantly felt like something was off?
Yeah.
Or maybe you met someone for the first time and right away you just got this feeling that you could trust them, you know?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's like those gut feelings, those like really quick judgments we make.
Yeah.
They aren't just random right?
Right.
Turns out there's a whole science behind them. It's called thin slicing.
Yeah, thin slicing. It's been fascinating how our brains can just take like a tiny bit of information and make these really accurate judgments.
It really is. And that's what we're going to dive into today, really explore this whole thin slicing thing.
Yeah.
We've got some research and excerpts from texts about it. Plus, we'll look at what Neurolaunch and Simply Psychology have to say about it, too.
So we're going to kind of unpack how this whole thin slicing thing works, figure out like where it's really accurate and also where it might, lead us astray a little bit.
Exactly. Basically, we're going to uncover this hidden superpower we probably all use every day without even realizing it.
It is kind of like a superpower, isn't it?
Totally. So first things first, let's talk about how fast this all happens. I mean, how quick are we talking when it comes to thin slicing?
Oh, we're talking super fast, like milliseconds, less than a tenth of a second.
Whoa, really? That's insane.
Yeah. And studies show that people can figure out if someone's attractive, likable, even how competent they are in under 50 milliseconds.
Wow. That's faster than I could snap my fingers. But I got to ask, how's that even possible? Can't just be about looks, can it?
No, not just looks. While, physical appearance might be a small part of it, it's really about our brains. They process information unconsciously and so incredibly fast.
That's amazing.
It's like your brain has this built-in supercomputer that scans for patterns and makes like super quick decisions, all based on those patterns.
Wow, that's a great way to put it. I bet that kind of ability was pretty important for our ancestors, way back when.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine, like, you're walking through the jungle and suddenly there's a stranger. You don't exactly have time to, like, sit down and chat to decide if they're friend or foe, right? You got to make a quick judgment. And in those cases, back then, thin slicing could have been a matter of survival.
So are we talking about a skill that's been, like, honed over thousands of years?
Exactly.
That's pretty incredible. Okay, so fast forward to today. We're not dodging saber-toothed tigers anymore.
Thankfully, no.
So where does this thin slicing ability really come in handy in the modern world?
Well, you might be surprised. For example, in professional settings, research shows you can actually tell how effective a teacher is in the classroom just by watching a few seconds of their lecture.
Wait, hold on. Really? Just a few seconds? You can tell if a teacher's good or bad from that tiny bit of information?
Yep, that's what the research says.
Huh. I guess it makes you think about those teachers you instantly loved or disliked. Maybe thin slicing was at work there.
It very likely was. And it's not just teachers either. There are similar studies with sales managers. You can figure out how effective they are just by listening to a 20-second audio clip.
Get out of here.
Yeah, and get this. Even for something as important as hiring decisions, studies show accurate judgments can be made from just 12 seconds of an interview.
12 seconds?
Yeah.
Seriously. That's barely enough time to say hello. So I guess what they say about first impressions really is true.
Oh, they matter more than we think. But it's not all about people either. Thin slicing affects how we interact with the digital world too. Think about websites. Have you ever, clicked away from a site almost immediately because something felt off? Maybe it seemed sketchy or just hard to use?
Oh yeah, all the time. I always just thought I was being picky.
Well, that's thin slicing in action. We're constantly sizing up websites, checking their security, how trustworthy they seem, and how easy they are to use, and we do all that in just a few seconds.
That's wild. It's amazing how much our brains are doing without us even knowing it.
It really is.
It's like we have this hidden superpower,
I like that. And you know what? It's a superpower that gets even stronger with experience.
Really?
Yeah. Studies show that experts in their fields, they can make really accurate decisions in 10 seconds just using thin slicing.
So all those years of experience really do pay off.
They do. The decisions they make are often just as good as ones made with tons more information and analysis. Think about a doctor making a split-second diagnosis in the ER, or a seasoned investor checking out a potential investment. Their experience lets them thin slice effectively and make those tough calls under pressure.
That's so cool. But wait, there's another layer to this, right?
Yeah.
Something about how men and women thin slice differently.
That's right. Research has actually found that women tend to be better at thin slicing than men. Now, researchers are still trying to figure out why.
That makes you wonder, doesn't it? Maybe women are just naturally more tuned in to social cues because of, traditionally raising children and managing all those complex relationships. It's just a thought, but Okay, so we've seen how crazy fast and accurate thin slicing can be. But I have a feeling there has to be a downside to all of this. It can't all be sunshine and roses, can it?
You're right. There are some potential downsides we need to talk about. You're definitely right. Thin slicing can be, a really powerful tool, but it's not perfect. There are some downsides.
That's what I was thinking. Like, it almost sounds too good to be true.
Hmm.
So what are some of the things we should watch out for?
Well, one of the biggest ones is that thin slicing can be affected by, our own biases.
Only biases.
Yeah, like those unconscious beliefs and assumptions we all have.
Oh, right. Like those things we don't even realize are affecting how we see things.
Exactly. And sometimes those biases can lead us to make judgments that are just plain wrong or unfair.
So what you're saying is our gut feelings, they aren't always right.
That's right. Think about it like this. Let's say you're interviewing someone for a job, and they remind you of, I don't know, someone you didn't really get along with in the past.
Okay, yeah. I see where you're going with this.
You might, without even realizing it, start judging them negatively, even if they're totally qualified.
Makes sense. It's like we're letting our past experiences, good or bad, mess with our judgment in the present.
That's exactly it. And it's not just our own personal biases we need to be aware of. There's also societal biases, like those stereotypes and prejudices that are kind of just out there in our culture.
So sometimes those snap judgments we're making, they might not be based on anything real. They might just be based on these ideas we've picked up from everywhere, basically.
Sadly, yeah, that happens a lot. There are studies that show people are more likely to think someone who's tall is more competent, or someone wearing a suit is more trustworthy.
Really?
Yeah, and those perceptions, they're often based on these societal biases, not on anything the person's actually done.
That's kind of unsettling, isn't it? It makes you wonder how many times we've gotten the wrong idea about someone because of these biases we have without even knowing it.
It's a good thing to think about. It really shows how important it is to be aware of these biases, both our own and the ones that are kind of floating around in society. And, we have to actively try to fight against them.
Okay, so we have to be careful not to let those biases hijack our thin slicing skills. But what about when thin slicing is a good thing? I mean, we've talked about the downsides, but there must be times when it's really helpful, right?
Oh, for sure. Thin slicing can be a huge help in a lot of situations. Like, think about first responders, firefighters, paramedics.
Yeah.
They often have to make decisions in seconds, literally life or death stuff.
Wow, yeah.
They use thin slicing all the time to assess a scene quickly and figure out the best way to help.
So in those super intense, high-pressure moments, thin slicing can actually save lives.
Absolutely. And it's not just them. Thin slicing is really important in medicine, too. When a doctor has to make a quick diagnosis, or in business, when you're negotiating a deal, and being able to read people is super important.
I'm starting to see that thin slicing is kind of a double-edged sword.
I think that's a good way to put it.
It can be super useful, even life-saving, but it can also lead us to make bad judgments if we're not paying attention.
Exactly. It's a powerful tool that we need to use carefully and be aware of how it works. And, this becomes even more important when we start talking about thin slicing and artificial intelligence.
Whoa, AI. Now that's where things get really interesting. It's like we're teaching machines to think like us, to make those same quick judgments. But what happens when AI starts thin slicing? Does it have the same problems we do?
That's the big question, and it's something we'll dive into in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back, and we're ready to wrap up our deep dive into thin slicing.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From how our brains make these lightning-fast judgments to, the potential downsides and how our biases can sneak in.
And now we're getting to the really mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah, thin slicing and artificial intelligence.
It's kind of freaky, right?
Yeah.
Like we're teaching machines to think like us, to make those split-second decisions just like we do.
It is pretty wild to think about.
But, dodging saber-toothed tigers is one thing. Now we're dealing with algorithms that are making decisions about us, maybe even using thin slicing.
It's definitely something to think about. I mean, we use thin slicing every day when we meet someone new, when we're shopping, even choosing a restaurant. We're constantly making quick judgments based on, just a little bit of information.
And now we're giving that power to machines.
Well, we're giving them the ability to process information super fast and to make decisions based on that information.
But couldn't you argue that algorithms could be more objective than humans?
Maybe, but there's a catch. Even though algorithms can process things way faster than we can, they're not immune to bias. In fact, sometimes they can even make those biases worse.
So if an algorithm is trained on data that already has, like, societal biases baked in,
Exactly. It could end up perpetuating those biases in its decision-making.
so those biases about gender, race, or, even things like someone's income, they could get, like, amplified by the algorithm.
That's the worry. Let's say you have an algorithm that's supposed to help screen job applicants.
Okay.
If the data it's trained on mostly shows men in leadership positions, it might start to connect leadership with being male without even realizing it.
Whoa.
And that could lead to the algorithm unfairly choosing men over women, even if they have the same qualifications.
So it's not enough to just make algorithms smarter. We have to make them fair, too.
That's the challenge, and it's one that a lot of really smart people are working on.
So how do we do that? How do we make sure that these algorithms are making fair and unbiased decisions?
Well, first, we have to be super careful about the data we use to train them. It needs to be diverse and represent everyone fairly.
So it's like garbage in, garbage out, right?
Exactly. If you train an algorithm on bad data, you'll get bad results. And second, we need to keep an eye on how these algorithms are doing. We need to be able to spot any biases that might pop up and fix them.
So we can't just set these algorithms loose and forget about them.
Nope, it's a continuous process. We have to keep learning and adjusting. It's the only way to make sure we're using AI responsibly.
This whole deep dive has been pretty eye-opening. We've gone from how our own brains work to the future of AI.
It's been quite the journey.
And thin slicing, it turns out, is at the heart of it all.
It is. And while we're just starting to understand all the implications, I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about.
It definitely has.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. And remember, folks, thin slicing is a powerful tool. Use it wisely.